People think the scariest part of these mountains is the wildlife, or maybe the weather. They're wrong. It's the silences. The places where the forest goes still in a way that doesn't feel natural. Places where even the wind seems to hesitate, like it's afraid of disturbing something older than the trees themselves. I've worked these ridges for close to 25 years, and I've seen enough strange things to fill 10 lifetimes. But there's one stretch of land, a crooked bowl-shaped valley tucked between two unnamed ridgelines, that's been trouble since before any of us were around. It's not even marked on the official maps. We call it Hollow Creek, though there's no creek there. Never has been. Just a depression in the land that should echo and never does. My first real encounter with that place happened my 3rd year on the job. A man, mid-40s, ex-military, one of those guys who carried himself like he'd seen worse than anything we had out here, went missing near that valley. He'd come up alone for a 3-day hiking trip, signed the registry, checked all the boxes, seemed fine. He didn't come back. We searched for 2 days before we found his tent. It wasn't torn, it wasn't knocked over, it was just empty. His boots were still lined up neatly beside the flap. His pack was inside with the zipper open, like he'd been reaching in for something. Everything was accounted for. Water, food, knife, map, phone. The only thing missing was him. But that wasn't the part that bothered me. Right behind his tent were footprints. His, definitely. They went 20 yards into the trees and then stopped. Not faded, not washed out, just stopped, mid-stride, like he'd stepped on to something that wasn't there anymore. We never found him. That case put Hollow Creek on my radar, but the one that kept me awake, still keeps me awake, happened maybe 6 years later. A pair of brothers, late 20s, regulars in the park, came up for a weekend trip. They knew the trails better than some of the new cadets. Tough guys, loud, funny, good dudes. They weren't the type to scare easy. On their second night, they radioed the station. The older brother's voice cracked through the static with one word: help. We tried to reach them again, but the radio kept cutting out, like something was blocking the signal. When we finally picked up enough of the transmission to understand, he kept repeating that his brother was gone, that he'd been taken, but not by a person. We dispatched a response team immediately. When we found him, he was sitting on the ground with his back against a dead oak, staring up at nothing. His pupils were blown wide, like he'd seen something his brain refused to process. He told us the story in pieces, his voice shaking the whole time. They'd been camped just outside Hollow Creek. In the middle of the night, he woke up to his brother whispering, "Do you hear that?" But the thing was, he didn't hear anything. No wind, no owls, nothing. The silence got heavier and heavier, like the air itself was thickening. Then they heard footsteps. Not heavy ones, not human ones. Just soft, slow crunches circling their camp in a perfect line. No breathing, no scent, no animal sounds. Just the steps. The brothers grabbed their lights and scanned the tree line. "Yeah," that's when the younger one said, "It's behind us." The older brother turned, and his brother was just gone. No noise, no movement, no scream, just gone. When we searched the area, we found something I still can't explain. In the middle of a patch of undisturbed pine needles sat a single boot. The younger brother's, upright, not knocked over, not scuffed, like someone had lifted him straight up out of it. No prints, no drag marks, nothing around it but untouched forest floor. We never found him either. The older brother never came back to Appalachia, moved across the country, told me once, over email, he still hears those footsteps some nights, circling his house, and he still hears the silence. People always imagine the woods as loud, birds, bugs, branches creaking, wind whispering through the needles, and most of the time they're right. But in certain pockets of these mountains, the silence is the loudest thing you'll ever hear. It presses on you, crawls under your skin, sits in the spaces between your ribs. That's the part no visitor ever understands. Silence can be a warning. After the brother's case, I started paying more attention to Hollow Creek. Not officially, hell, mentioning that valley in a report would have gotten the paperwork kicked back at me, but quietly, on my own. For months, every spare patrol hour I had, I was out there, mapping the strange spots, marking down anything out of place. And there was always something out of place. Sometimes it was the air, thicker, colder, like you'd walked into a winter storm even when the sun was melting your hat. Sometimes it was the trees, leaning in ways that looked like they were bowing toward something in the center of the valley. Other times it was the sound or the lack of it, like the forest was holding its breath. But there was one night that made it all real for me. One night that still feels closer than it should. It was late October. A fog had rolled in from the west, low and fast, swallowing the woods like it had somewhere urgent to be. I'd been out checking a section of trail after a small landslide when dispatch radioed in a call from a solo backpacker. A young woman, voice trembling, said she'd gotten lost. Said her GPS kept resetting and spinning her in circles. Said she kept ending up near a big hollow, even when I'm walking uphill. That got my attention. I told her to stay put, told her not to move, told her I was on my way. But the signal cut out before she told me exactly where she was. I knew she was somewhere near Hollow Creek. I could feel it, like the valley was tugging her in. They do that sometimes. Certain places in these mountains don't just sit there, they pull. I made it to the edge of the ridge just as the fog thickened enough to swallow the beam of my flashlight. It was like walking blindfolded through wet cotton. Every crack of a twig sounded too close, too deliberate. Then I heard it. Not a scream, not a voice, just a soft, rhythmic tapping. At first I thought it was a branch swinging in the wind, but the air was dead still, no movement, no breeze. The tapping kept going, slow, steady, almost like someone was knocking on a hollow log. But there were no logs near me. I followed the sound down a narrow slope until the ground leveled out. The fog parted just enough for my light to catch something pale on the ground. A shoe, a woman's hiking shoe. Still warm when I touched it. I called her name once, twice, 3 times. The sound didn't travel, it just hit the fog and died. Then the tapping stopped. I didn't hear anything for a long moment, and then a whisper. So faint I thought it was my mind playing tricks. Here. It didn't sound scared. It didn't sound hurt. It sounded wrong, detached, like someone repeating a word they didn't understand. I spun, shining my light in every direction. Nothing, just trees fading into fog. But the whisper came again, closer this time. Here. I followed it without thinking, guided by instinct or stupidity, maybe both. My boots sank into soft moss and the air grew colder with every step. Then I realized something that nearly stopped my heart. I couldn't hear my footsteps. Even when I stomped, nothing. No crunch, no thud, just silence swallowing every sound. And then, right at the edge of my light, I saw her, standing perfectly still, back to me, head tilted slightly to the left, like she was listening to something behind her. I called her name. No reaction. I stepped closer, slow, cautious. When I got within 10 feet, she finally moved. Not her whole body, just her head. It turned, not naturally, not smoothly, but like something had nudged it abruptly from the inside. Her eyes met mine, wide, glassy, unfocused. I whispered, "Ma'am, can you hear me?" She blinked once, slow, deliberate. And then she said it again, barely audible. "Here." Not to me, past me, like she was answering someone else. I grabbed her arm, lightly, trying not to startle her, and the skin felt cold, like she'd been standing in water. She didn't resist, but she also didn't really follow. Her body moved, but her attention stayed fixed on the fog behind me. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see what she was staring at. It took almost an hour to guide her out of that valley, and the whole time she didn't say another word. But twice, just twice, I felt her tighten her grip on my sleeve, like something was walking parallel with us, just out of sight. When we finally made it to the ridge, the fog split like someone pulling back curtains. The sound rushed back all at once. Wind, birds, the normal night noises. The woman collapsed the second we stepped into it, not unconscious, just drained, like she'd been holding herself up with something that wasn't entirely her own strength. At the hospital, they said she was fine. No injuries, no trauma, no hypothermia. She didn't explain what happened. She didn't remember what happened. Or she didn't want to. Before she left town, her father shook my hand and said something I still think about. She hasn't spoken since the woods, but she keeps pointing behind her, like something followed her home. I used to think Hollow Creek was just a cursed patch of land, a place where the earth folded in on itself and people slipped through the cracks. But the truth is, it isn't the valley that scares me. It's the pattern. It's the way every story ends the same, no matter how different it starts. Someone wanders too close, something notices, and then the woods go quiet. Too quiet. There was one last incident that forced me to stop pretending I didn't know what was happening. It happened a little over a year ago, right before winter. A pair of new rangers, kids really, were sent to check out a small, unreported fire somewhere near the northern basin. Smoke had been spotted drifting past the ridgeline, thin but steady. Could have been a stray campfire or a lightning strike that smoldered too long, nothing unusual. But the location, the coordinates put it right near Hollow Creek. I told them I'd go instead. They insisted they had it handled. I should have fought harder. When their radio finally crackled to life half an hour later, I could hear wind on the mic, but there was no wind that night. I heard one of them breathing hard, like he'd been running. I called his name. He didn't answer. Instead, he whispered two words I'll never forget. "Don't come." The radio cut out. I grabbed my gear and headed straight there, and the whole way in, the woods felt wrong, heavy, listening, the kind of silence that has weight. It didn't take long to find their tracks, clear, deliberate, both sets moving fast. Then the prints split. One veered toward the ridge, the other stopped, just like the ex-military hiker years back, One set, half astride, ending in freshly disturbed soil that looked too smooth, like something had sealed itself over the rest. I followed the ridge prints, hoping to find at least one of them. When I got close, I saw a glow through the trees, firelight, but not crackling, not moving, just a still, steady orange light. The campfire was perfect. A neat circle of stones, flames burning straight upward with no smoke, no heat. And on the ground beside it lay one of the rangers, eyes open, staring at the sky, breathing, alive, but frozen like someone had pressed pause on him. I knelt and shook him gently. No reaction. I checked his pulse, fast but steady. He wasn't unconscious. He just wasn't present. That's when I realized there were more footprints around the fire. Not human footprints, not animal either. Impressions in the leaves, shallow, spaced unevenly, circling the fire like something had been moving around it, watching it, studying it. I remember the hair on my arms lifting like static from a thunderstorm just before the strike. Then the fire guttered just once, like something exhaled on it. I didn't stay to see what it was. I threw the kit over my shoulder and I ran. I didn't care how it looked, didn't care how long it took. I didn't stop until the forest sound came back and the air felt like air again. He woke up an hour later in the truck, blinked around like he'd just woken from a dream. Couldn't remember anything past seeing the fire. The other ranger was never found. The official report says lost in low visibility. But we know better. That night, I stood at the edge of the valley and listened, really listened, and I finally understood the truth people have been hinting at for centuries. Something lives in Hollow Creek. Not a creature, not a spirit, not anything we have a name for. Something that notices people the way a fisherman notices ripples on a lake. Something that waits, patient and curious, until someone steps close enough for it to reach. And once it reaches you, it doesn't need to leave a mark. It doesn't need to chase a call. It just takes. Quietly, completely, clean as a breath being drawn in. I've worked these woods a long time, and I've stopped pretending I can fix this. I can't. None of us can. All I can do is warn hikers away, close trails for reasons I don't write down, and keep people as far from that valley as possible. And I'll keep doing it until the day I retire, or until Hollow Creek decides it's my turn. Because people always ask why I don't go near that place anymore. And the truth is simple. Hollow Creek doesn't take twice. It waits for the ones who've seen it. It remembers. And I'm not stepping back into something that remembers me. Story 2. I've been a ranger in the southern Appalachian district for most of my adult life. And I can tell you something most folks don't realize. The mountains remember everything. Storms, fires, footsteps, mistakes, they sink into the soil like rainwater and stay there. The land out here carries memories the way old people carry regrets. Quietly, heavily, without ever needing to talk about them. But every now and then, the mountains bring those memories back up, like something buried rises to the surface and asks to be noticed. Sometimes it asks quietly. Sometimes it doesn't. This story is about the time it didn't. It started on a Wednesday morning around late September, the kind of morning where the air bites your lungs and the fog hangs low enough to brush your forehead. I was inspecting the fire roads near the ridge that leads to mile marker 37. It's an old trail, older than the park, older than most of the towns around it. Locals call it the Old Wagon Spine, though I've never seen a wagon anywhere near it. My partner for the day was Ranger Elise Harrow, smart, sharp, and new to the district. She'd transferred from a coastal post where the weirdest thing she'd dealt with was oversized raccoons breaking into coolers. She had no idea what the mountains could be like after a bad storm. We were halfway down the fire road when Elise pointed through the trees and said, "Did you know there's a cabin up here?" I told her there wasn't. I'd patrolled that stretch 1,000 times, never seen a cabin, not even the outline of one. But the fog was thin enough that I could make out something square and dark between the trees. A roof, a window, a chimney with no smoke, a cabin where there shouldn't have been one. "Probably an old hunting shack," Elise said. "Maybe someone put it up illegally." Maybe. But the boards didn't look weathered. The roof didn't sag. The glass wasn't broken. It looked maintained, lived in. And that bothered me. The park didn't allow private structures out here, and the last hunting shack had been torn down before I was born. Plus, if this cabin had been here for years, why had nobody reported it? Why didn't it show up on any of the surveys? We stepped off the fire road and moved closer. Every step we took made the fog feel thicker, heavier, like it was clinging to our clothes. The woods was silent, but not the normal kind of forest quiet. This was something deeper, like the sound had been pulled out of the air. The closer we got, the more I felt like the air around the cabin had weight. The trees leaned away from it slightly, bending at unnatural angles, like the whole forest was trying not to touch it. When we got within 10 yards, Elise slowed down. "You feel that?" she asked. "Yeah." It felt like the pressure drop before a lightning strike. The cabin was built from dark timber, hand-cut, not milled. The boards looked almost black in the fog. The single window in front reflected nothing, no trees, no sky, not even us, like the glass wasn't glass at all. On the door, carved in shallow, neat lines, was a symbol, a circle with 3 straight slashes cutting down through it. Well, I'd never seen it before. Yeah. You think anyone's inside? Elise asked. I doubt it. I really hope not. She knocked twice. The sound died instantly, like the wood absorbed it before it could echo. No answer. She reached for the handle. Wait, I said, but she'd already turned it. The door swung open smoothly, too smoothly for an old cabin. It didn't creak or groan. It didn't resist. It just opened, like it had been waiting for years to be used again. Inside, the cabin was empty. Not dusty empty or abandoned empty, but recently cleaned empty. The floorboards weren't warped or rotten. The walls were smooth. There was a small table in the corner with a wooden bowl on it, perfectly centered. But the room felt wrong. Not dangerous, exactly. Just wrong. Like the proportions weren't quite right, as if the room was a couple inches too long on one side and too short on the other. But your eyes couldn't prove it. Elise walked in first. Her boots didn't make a sound. She pointed at the bowl. You think someone's living here? There was something inside it. A stone, perfectly round, dark gray with a faint sheen like river rock, but warm when I touched it. I put it back immediately. Then I noticed something else. No dust, no spiderweb, no insects, not even a single dead leaf dragged in by the wind. A forest cabin that didn't have a single trace of the forest inside it. That's when I heard a sound, faint, muffled, like fabric brushing wood. It came from behind the cabin. "Did you hear that?" Elise asked. Before I could answer, she was already stepping back out the door. I followed her around the cabin's side and saw something that made both of us stop cold. Behind the cabin was a second door, identical to the first. Same symbol carved on it, except this one was slightly open. Elise reached for her radio. Before she could hit the button, the door moved. Not fast, just a slow, careful swing outward. And someone stepped out. Not a man, not a woman, not old, not young, just someone. Their clothes were plain, old-fashioned, a dark coat, rough trousers, boots with no laces. Their face was pale, unreadable, featureless, in a way that made it impossible to tell anything about them. Not their age, not their emotion, not even whether they saw us. They didn't react at all. They just walked past us, silent, steady, deliberate, and entered the front door of the cabin as if we weren't even there. Elise looked at me. I looked at her. Neither of us spoke. We ran around the front. The cabin was empty again. The bowl undisturbed. The air still. The door closed behind us, even though neither of us touched it. "Where the hell did they go?" Elise whispered. I had no answer. She stepped closer to the window. "Maybe they slipped out." She froze. "Don't move," she said. I joined her and looked out the window. We could see the trees, the fog, the clearing, but we couldn't see ourselves. Our silhouettes weren't in the glass. We weren't reflected. Only the cabin's interior behind us showed in the window. "Nope," I said. "We're leaving." We turned toward the door. It was locked. Neither of us had locked it. Neither of us had heard it click shut. I kicked the bottom of the door. It didn't budge. Not even a swaying of the hinges. It felt like kicking a concrete wall. Elise ran her fingers along the frame and stopped when she reached the symbol carved into the wood. "It's warm," she said quietly. Before I could warn her, she traced one of the slashes with her fingertip. The cabin shuddered. The floorboards trembled under our boots, then stilled. Everything went quiet again, quiet in a way that made my ears ache. Then from the back room, we heard the sound of footsteps. Slow, measured, coming toward us. Elise grabbed my arm. "What do we do?" "We don't stay here," I said. I looked at the window. It was old glass, thin, fragile. I smashed it with my elbow, or I tried to. The glass didn't break. It didn't even crack. Instead, it felt soft, like pushing into cold water. My arm went straight through, no pain, no resistance, and came out the other side, fully dry. But my reflection still didn't appear. Behind us, the footsteps grew louder. Not hurry, not threatening, just coming. Elise climbed through the window first. Her body passed through like mist passing through light. I followed her, and the world outside felt instantly lighter. Sound snapped back. The smell of pine filled my lungs. The fog thinned. But when I turned back to look at the cabin, something was different. It wasn't there anymore. Not the porch, not the roof, not the window we climbed through. All that remained was a patch of empty clearing where the cabin should have been. And at the center of that clearing, half buried in the soil, was the stone from inside the wooden bowl. Still warm, still round, still waiting. Elise whispered, We need to report this. But I knew something she didn't. If we filed paperwork, we'd be asked to show the location. And I wasn't going back, not to prove a point, not to check a box, not for any reason. Even as we walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd stepped out just in time. Because the cabin didn't feel abandoned. It didn't feel haunted. It felt occupied. Not by something angry, not by something hungry, but by something that didn't understand people the same way we didn't understand it. Something that only noticed us because we noticed it. Something that would have kept us if we'd stayed a few seconds longer. We never found tracks from the person who walked between the doors. We never found foundation stones, nails, lumber, anything that proved a cabin was ever there. And that night, long after I'd gone home, I woke up to the sound of knuckles tapping wood somewhere in my house. Not fast, not frantic, just steady, like someone knocking on a cabin door. I barely slept after the night I heard the knocking. It stopped the moment I sat up in bed, and for a long time I stared into the dark, waiting for it to return. It didn't. The silence dragged on for hours, thick enough that I started wondering if the sound had been part of a dream. I wanted to believe that, but deep down I knew it wasn't. By morning, I'd already decided I wasn't reporting anything to the district supervisors. They'd either laugh, accuse me of overworking myself, or worse, send someone out to investigate and force me to go with them. I wasn't stepping back into those woods. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But Elise showed up at my door around noon with mud still on her boots and a look in her eyes that told me she hadn't slept either. "Did anything weird happen to you last night?" she asked. I told her no. She didn't believe me, and I didn't blame her. The truth was written all over my face, but she didn't push. Instead, she said, "I went back this morning." My stomach dropped. "Tell me you're joking." "I had to know," she said. "I had to see if it was still gone." And I found something. I didn't want to hear it. Whatever she brought back, I didn't want it in my house, in my life, anywhere near me. But she pulled something from her jacket pocket anyway and set it gently on my kitchen table. A second stone. Round, dark, smooth, identical to the one we'd seen inside the bowl. Except this one wasn't warm. It was ice cold. I stepped back, instinctively. "Where did you get that?" "It wasn't there yesterday," she said. "But this morning, when I reached the clearing, it was sitting right where the cabin should have been, in the center, like someone left it there." "What do you mean, should have been?" "There's nothing there again. No foundation, no clearing ring, no broken branches, not even disturbed soil, just forest. Real, normal forest." I leaned closer without touching it. "Why'd you bring it to me?" "Because it wasn't the only thing." She hesitated. There was something carved into a tree. "Another symbol?" "No, not that circle, something else." She took out her phone and showed me a picture. It was the unmistakable outline of a cabin, square, roof angled, chimney on the right, etched deeply into the bark. No details, just a perfect silhouette. And inside the outline, tiny vertical lines, like tally marks. Maybe 7 or 8, maybe more. "Did you carve that?" she asked. The question made me angry. Of course not. "I know," she said quickly. "I didn't either. But it wasn't there yesterday." "Then don't go back," I said. "That place isn't normal." "I know that too," she said softly. "But I think it's trying to track something. The hell does that mean? Those marks in the cabin outline, I counted them. There are 11. So, she met my eyes. There were 11 missing persons in this district in the last 14 years. I felt something cold settle in my gut. Coincidence, I said, and even I didn't believe it. I thought so too, but then I ran those names with the locations they disappeared. Her voice dropped. All of them were last seen within a mile of where we found that cabin. No, that couldn't be right. The area was big. Trails crossed everywhere. It wasn't unusual for people to go missing near remote sections, but 11, all within the same radius. She must have seen the denial forming on my face because she pulled a folded piece of paper from her jacket and handed it to me. Coordinates, names. Every one of them clustered around the same spot. Mile marker, 37. That place is calling people, she whispered. We sat in silence for a long time. My clock ticked loudly in the background, each second carving deeper into the quiet. Finally, I asked her, why did you really go back there? I had a dream last night, she said, or something like a dream. I woke up and heard knocking, but it wasn't at my door. It was on wood, old wood, like that cabin. And I swear I heard someone walking across the floor right next to me. Slow steps, careful steps, like they were avoiding the places that creaked. My skin crawled. She continued. When I finally got up and turned on the light, there was dirt on my bedroom floor, thin, like it had been carried in on someone's boots. And you think, what? That it followed you home? I don't know, she said, but when I got to the clearing, the forest felt wrong, like it was listening. I closed my eyes and exhaled. We're rangers, I said. We investigate. That's what we do, but this, whatever this is, it's beyond us. I know, she said, but we can't ignore it. She was right, and I hated that she was right. That evening, after the sun dipped low and the trees outside turned black against the sky, we packed gear and headed back toward the ridge. Not because we wanted to, because we needed answers. The forest was different at night. The fog was thinner, but the shadows were thicker. And the closer we got to marker 37, the quieter everything became. No owls, no insects, not even wind moving through the branches. We followed the old fire road by flashlight. Our boots crunched leaves that felt too dry for recent rain. At one point, I thought I heard something behind us, soft shuffling. But every time I turned, nothing was there. We reached the clearing just after 9. Except there was no clearing. The forest stood whole, untouched, like it had never been disturbed. But the air still carried that heaviness, that pocket of pressure that didn't belong. We're in the right place, Elise said. She pointed at a young poplar tree. On its bark, the cabin silhouette was carved again. Only this time, there were more tally marks. Maybe 15, maybe 16. What's changing? She whispered. Why did the number go up? I didn't want to know. Then Elise's flashlight flicked. Once, twice. And then the beam steadied on something behind the trees. A wall. Not wood, not metal. Just a flat, dark surface standing between the trunks, angled slightly, like a cabin wall partially hidden in the forest. But the texture was wrong. Too smooth, too clean. The light passed over it, and the surface swallowed the brightness like ink. The sound came next. Not knocking, not footsteps. Breathing. Slow, steady, deep breathing, from just beyond the trees. Not human, too controlled, too rhythmic, like something that didn't get tired, something that only breathed so we could hear it. Elise grabbed my sleeve, trembling. Look. In the darkness behind the smooth wall, a shape shifted. A figure, not the one we saw walk between doors. This one was taller. Shoulders wrong, neck too long, head tilted to the side as if the weight of it confused the body beneath it. It didn't move toward us. It didn't threaten. It just watched, or listened. I whispered, "Back away," slowly. Elise didn't move. Her eyes locked onto the figure like she was trying to understand it, like she was unable to look anywhere else. "Elise," I said again, "come on, don't stay still." But she stayed rooted. The figure shifted again, just a slight movement, like it breathed in deeper. The smooth, dark wall behind it rippled, as if the surface were liquid, responding to its breath. Then Elise spoke in a voice I barely recognized. "It's not a cabin." "What do you mean?" She lifted her flashlight slowly, her hand trembling. "It's something pretending to be one." I pulled her back, and for a second she resisted before stumbling into me. When we looked again, the figure was gone. The wall was gone. Only trees remained. The forest exhaled. The pressure lifted. The normal night sounds returned, as if something massive had just withdrawn back into the dark. We didn't run. We walked fast, steady, refusing to look over our shoulders. When we reached the fire road, Elise finally spoke. It wanted to see who came back. I didn't answer. The next morning, she didn't show up for her shift. I called her. No answer. I drove to her cabin. Her truck was in the driveway, but her house was unlocked. Inside, everything looked normal except for one thing. On her living room wall, carved deep and fresh into the wood paneling, was the cabin silhouette. This time, the tally marks filled the entire outline, too many to count, nearly ripping through the shape itself. The front door creaked behind me, and for a second I thought she'd return, but no one was there. Only the soft sound of breathing, not from inside the house, from behind the walls. I left immediately, as she's still missing. They'll list her as one more person who vanished in the mountains. They'll say maybe she slipped on a ridge or fell into a ravine, but I know the truth, and I know the next part. What I can feel building every night when the air goes still is that it isn't done. Something learned us when we found that cabin. Something counted us. And something wants the number to go up. I don't patrol near mile marker 37 anymore, but sometimes late at night, I hear the old wood knocking again. Not asking, not warning, inviting. I spent most of my career patrolling the western slope of the southern Appalachians, a stretch of land that never made it onto postcards or travel blogs. Too rocky, too shadowed, too full of deep gullies that swallowed the sun by early afternoon. It's not the part of the mountains people imagine when they picture rolling hills and scenic overlooks. This area is older, darker, and a whole lot less forgiving. But the job paid enough to keep me fed, and for the most part the shifts were quiet, or they used to be. Everything changed the year the fog stopped moving. I'm not talking about morning mist that hangs low and burns off by noon. This was different. The fog in that area had always rolled through the valleys like a living thing, never staying still, always drifting, always shifting. This new fog didn't move. It settled in and stayed like it had roots. The first time I noticed it was late October. I was patrolling Trail Ridge Line 12, a narrow path that cut straight across the slope, threading its way between old firs and pitch pines. The air was cold, but the cold was nothing compared to the quiet. Everything felt muffled. Even my footsteps sounded like they were happening underwater. The fog waited in one specific section of the trail, a long corridor between two ridges where the ground dipped and the canopy pinched inward. At first, I thought it was just typical valley mist pooling in the low spots, but the closer I got, the more it bothered me. It didn't stir, didn't spread, didn't even react to the wind. It just hung in one perfect shape like a block of carved air. I radioed dispatch. Got a strange weather pattern here on line 12. Fog sitting low and not dispersing. They told me to monitor it and move on. Typical response. Nobody in the station worried about fog. But I did, because the deeper I walked into that section, the more the forest changed around me. The trail markers that should have been there every quarter mile were missing. The trees felt older, different species than I remembered growing on that section. No pine smell, no leaf mold smell, no forest smell at all. Just cold, just quiet, just fog. And then I heard breathing. Not human breathing, not animal breathing. This was something slow, deep, and distant, like the mountain itself was inhaling. It came from the fog, vibrating through the still air, a long, slow cycle that didn't match my lungs. I stopped walking immediately. The breathing kept going. I called out, "Hello? Anyone out here?" The breathing didn't change, didn't speed up or slow down. It didn't even pause. It wasn't responding to me. I took a step back, intending to turn around, and that's when I saw something move on the periphery. Not a shape, not a person, just a ripple in the fog, subtle like fingers dragging through heavy smoke. I froze. The ripple passed again, a little farther from the first place. This time the fog darkened in that spot, then lightened again. It wasn't mist. It was something behind the mist. I backed out slowly until the normal woods returned, the pine scent, the familiar shapes of the trees, the markers nailed into trunks. When I checked my watch, 40 minutes had passed. I could have sworn I'd been in that strange fog for less than 10. I went straight back to the station and logged my report. My supervisor, Randall, listened, nodded, then gave me that look people give when they think you're stressed but don't want to say it. Trail closed due to weather. That's what he wrote. Nothing else. For the next week, we warned hikers away from Line 12, but we didn't barricade it. Rangers almost never barricade unless there's fire damage or storm fallout. That was a mistake. 3 days after the warning went out, a guy named Trevor Dalton, late 30s, marathon build, experienced hiker, checked in at the station and asked if he could take Ridgeline 12 for a quieter walk. Randall approved it. I was out on patrol at the time, so I didn't find out until hours later. Trevor didn't come back. When I got the call, I drove straight to the trailhead and started hiking. The sun was already dipping behind the ridge, and the shadows stretched long between the trunks. I followed boot prints, Trevor's, fresh enough that the moisture in the dirt hadn't dried yet. About 2 miles in, the print stopped. Just stopped. Like he'd been lifted straight up or vanished mid-step. Ahead of me was that same corridor of frozen fog, exactly where I'd seen it before, unmoving, unchanged, perfectly still. For a long minute, I just stood there with my hand on the radio, trying to will myself to step forward. Every instinct told me not to. The air felt wrong, thick with something I didn't want to meet again. I called Trevor's name. The sound hit the fog and died. No echo, no bounce, just silence swallowing everything. Then the breathing started again. But this time it was closer. A lot closer. Something shifted behind the wall of fog, huge, dark, slow-moving. I couldn't make out a shape, only mass. The breathing deepened, vibrating the ground under my boots like distant thunder. I raised my flashlight. The beam didn't penetrate the fog. It didn't illuminate anything. It just ended, like the fog swallowed the light whole. That's when I heard footsteps behind me, not in the fog, but on the trail I'd already walked. Human footsteps! I spun around, light ready, hand reaching for the flare on my belt. It wasn't Trevor. It was a woman I'd never seen before, mud on her jeans, hair tucked to her face, breathing fast, eyes wide, terrified. But what made me step back wasn't her appearance. It was the fact that she wasn't facing me. She had her back to me, even though she'd been walking in my direction. And she was whispering, "Not that way, not that way, not that way," over and over, voice trembling like a child hiding under blankets. I said her name quietly to calm her, except I didn't know her name, so I asked, "Ma'am, you all right? Where did you come from?" She didn't turn. Her shoulders shook. "You opened the door. Why'd you open it? Why'd you go near it? It sees you now." Something cold crawled up my spine. "What door?" Still whispering, "The fog is the door. You walk through it. It breathes you in." I tried to step around her to face her, but she staggered sideways, keeping her back toward me, hiding her face. I said, "Did you see a man? Tall, lean, brown hiking pack?" She let out a quick, broken laugh. "No, you don't see anyone in there. You don't see anything unless it wants you to." "Who?" She shook her head violently. "No name. Don't name it. Names make it look harder." "What's your name?" I asked. For a long moment she didn't answer. Then, barely audible, "Lydia." The name rang a bell. "Lydia who?" Another tremble. Then, "Monroe." I froze. Lydia Monroe had gone missing 11 months earlier. Search parties spent 5 days looking for her before the case was labeled unresolved. And here she was, standing on the trail, too thin, too pale, whispering like she'd forgotten how to speak to real people. "Lydia," I said gently, "we're going to get you out of here. I'm calling it in. Just stay with me." When I brought the radio up, she hissed and covered her ears. "Don't call," she said. "Don't speak loud. It hears voices." "What hears voices?" She pointed toward the fog, not with her hand. She kept those pinned to her sides, but with her whole body, leaning slightly like she was being tugged toward it. "The breathing thing," she said. "The thing that keeps the lost ones. It hides in the stillness." A low rumble came from the fog, as if reacting to her words. I grabbed her arm. "We're leaving now." She dug her heels into the dirt. "No, no, no, no. If we turn our backs, it follows." I didn't give her a choice. I pulled her up the trail, forcing her to move, and after several seconds, she stumbled into step beside me. The breathing grew louder behind us, deeper, slower. Halfway up the incline, Lydia collapsed to her knees. I dragged her again, refusing to look back. But even without turning, I felt something in the fog shift, like it had extended itself, stretching wider than before. Lydia screamed suddenly and pointed ahead. Something was standing in the trail. Not blocking it, just standing. A silhouette. Human-shaped. Still. But every part of my body screamed that it wasn't a person. I blinked, and in the space of that blink, the silhouette vanished. Lydia sobbed. It's outside now. It doesn't stay in the fog if it wants you. The next 5 minutes were a blur of dragging Lydia, stumbling, and forcing myself to keep my eyes forward. Shadows moved between trees. Footsteps that weren't ours echoed ahead. The woods felt warped, stretched, wrong. But eventually we broke free of that corridor. The lampposts by the trailhead came into view. I have never been so relieved to see man-made life. The instant we crossed into open space, Lydia went silent. She didn't speak again during the ride to the ranger station. She stared out the window, breathing fast, flinching every time the truck went over a bump, like she expected something to grab her. When we got to the station, Randall met us. He asked what happened. I started to explain. Lydia stood behind me, trembling. And then she spoke for the first time since leaving the trail. You can't close it, she whispered. It doesn't stay closed. Randall asked her what she meant. She slowly turned toward him, the overhead lights catching her face for the first time fully. Her eyes weren't right. Not red, not damaged. Just unfocused in a way that made my stomach twist. Like she'd spent too long staring at something the human mind wasn't built to understand. And then she said something that chilled me more than the fog ever did. It follows the one who breathes wrong. Randall frowned. Who? She lifted her hand, arm shaking, and pointed directly at me. My mouth went dry. Randall looked between us. What does that mean? Lydia whispered. He breathed when it breathed. It hurt him. It matched him. It knows his rhythm now. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. Because deep inside my chest, under my ribs, under my heartbeat, I could feel a faint vibration. Slow, deep, like something breathing far away. But the rhythm matched mine. And it hadn't before. The night after we brought Lydia in, I didn't sleep. I lay in my apartment above the old equipment shed, staring at the ceiling, listening for something I wasn't even sure had followed me. Every time the building creaked or the heater kicked on, my pulse jumped. Not because of the noise, but because of the quiet that settled afterward. Silence didn't feel like silence anymore. It felt like something waiting. Around 3 a.m, the vibrating sensation in my chest started again. Soft at first, so faint I thought it was just nerves, but then deeper, matching my breath the way Lydia warned. I sat up, holding my rib cage like I could stop the feeling with my hands. It wasn't pain, it wasn't pressure. It was recognition, like something far off, inhaled when I inhaled. Every part of me wanted to believe it was in my head. But around 4, the radios in the shed below crackled, faint through the floorboards. Static, not words. Then the static pulsed, rising and falling like breath. That was enough to get me out of bed. I threw on my uniform and stepped outside into the cold pre-dawn dark. The air felt too still. Not a single animal stirred. No owls, no insects, nothing. Even the wind seemed to avoid the ridge. I walked down to the shed, unlocked the door, and flicked on the light. The radios were quiet now, completely dead. I picked up the base unit, checked the settings, checked the emergency channel. Nothing. But when I tilted the radio in my hand, a faint whisper of static rose and fell again in that same slow cycle. I turned it off. The static kept going. I set the radio down and backed out, heart thudding. By sunrise, I was at the station, leaning over the counter with a cup of coffee I couldn't bring myself to drink. Randall came in not long after, yawning, rubbing sleep out of his eyes. He glanced at me and frowned. "You look like hell." "I have to talk about last night," I said. He sighed. "You need rest. That fog spooked you more than you want to admit. Something followed us from that trail." "Don't start with that." He sat at his desk, turning on his computer. "Trauma responses are normal. You and Lydia." "Where is she?" I cut in. "Still in the infirmary, sleeping. A nurse from town's on rotation." I nodded, forcing myself to breathe slowly, but that was the problem. Every breath I took made me think of the other one matching it. Randall tapped at his keyboard. "I already contacted the sheriff. They'll be picking her up today for medical evaluation and a missing persons debrief. You don't have to deal with this alone." "That fog corridor isn't normal," I said. "And Trevor, we don't know anything about Dalton yet. He's not coming out if we don't—" "Stop." Randall leaned forward. "I'm ordering you off that trail. No more checking it alone. You're on lower elevation patrol today. Clear?" It didn't matter whether it was clear. He wasn't letting me near that corridor again. But something told me I wouldn't have to go back to it. It would come to me. Around noon, I checked the infirmary. Lydia was awake but sitting curled on the cot, staring at the wall like she expected it to melt into a different shape. Her hair hung limp. Her hands kept flexing like she was checking if she still had fingers. I approached slowly. "Lydia?" She didn't look up at first. Then her eyes flicked toward me and widened. "You feel it, don't you?" she whispered. I didn't answer. She nodded anyway. "It doesn't let go. Once it knows your breath, it keeps the rhythm. It keeps the beat. It waits." "You survived 10 months," I said quietly. "How?" "I ran." Her voice cracked. "I ran every time it drifted closer. I slept in trees. I didn't talk. I didn't breathe deep. But then I got turned around. The woods bent. The path folded. The fog closed places it hadn't been before, and She swallowed hard. I started to hear my breathing echo. When that starts, it means it's close. "How'd you get out?" "I didn't." She hugged herself. "It let me out. Maybe it wanted someone else to follow. It gave me a door on purpose." Her eyes fixed on my chest. "And now it's listening to you." A shiver ran down my spine. Before I could ask more, Randall came in with 2 sheriff's deputies. Lydia shrank back instantly like they were predators. "We're taking her to the county hospital," Randall said softly, trying not to spook her further. "They'll handle it from here." Lydia stared at me as they led her out, a mix of pity and warning in her eyes. I didn't say goodbye. The afternoon patrol took me far from Line 12, through open fields and rocky outcrops that didn't house any fog corridors or breathing shadows. It should have been a relief, but the calm made everything worse. Too normal, too empty. Around 4 p.m., one of the hikers on the western loop reported something strange. "A sound like someone exhaling under the ground," he told me. "Deep, long? I thought it was a bear until I couldn't feel it in my ears, only in my chest." I got to the loop 20 minutes later. The hiker was gone. The trail was empty. Nothing looked off. Nothing felt off. until I stood still and closed my eyes. There it was, a vibration under my ribs, faint but unmistakable, and something else farther away but growing clearer, a second vibration beneath my feet, pulsing through the ground at almost the same rhythm. It was matching me, or I was matching it. I opened my eyes and backed up fast. The sun began dropping behind the ridge. The shadows stretched long on the path. Something darker than shadow flickered between the trees, too tall, too thin, and gone before my mind could process it. I turned back toward the station, walking at first, then jogging, then running full out, even though I hated how it made my breathing louder. The door slammed behind me as I entered. Randall looked up, startled. "You good?" "There's something out there," I gasped. "You're off the trail, right?" "I wasn't near line 12. "That's not what I asked." "I know. I'm telling you, the thing is moving. It's not sticking to that corridor." "Stop." He stood, voice firm. "You need a break. Go home, rest. This is stress." I wanted to yell at him. I wanted to drag him outside and make him stand still in that growing darkness until he felt it too. But I didn't trust myself to make sense. So I went home. But I didn't sleep. The vibration in my chest was stronger now. Every time I tried to sit still, it intensified, like something was tugging invisible threads under my skin, adjusting me, making me align to it. Around midnight, I turned off every light in the apartment and sat in the dark, listening. Not for my breath, for the one that wasn't mine. The wind rustled outside. A branch scraped the window, pipes settled, all normal sounds. But beneath them, deeper than them, something else exhaled. The heater clicked off. In the silence that followed, the second breath bloomed through the apartment. Slow. Heavy. Too heavy to come from lungs. I stood up, heart racing. The vibration in my chest synced with it perfectly. Then something scratched outside the shed. Slow. Deliberate, like fingers dragging along wood. I went to the window but couldn't see anything in the dark. I tried to radio the station. Static answered. The longer I listened, the more the static pulsed into the same rhythm as the breathing. My hands shook as I set it down. Something was circling the building. Not footsteps. Something softer. Like it glided instead of walked. The window beside my bed fogged over. Not from inside. From outside. A smear appeared across the glass like something pressed against it from the dark. The shape wasn't clear, only the motion, a long drag downward. I backed up slowly. The fog on the window deepened, swirling unnaturally like it had weight. A shadow formed behind it, tall, wrong proportions. Shoulders too narrow, arms too long. No face visible, just a silhouette leaning close to the glass, as if listening. The breathing deepened. My chest matched it involuntarily. I clamped a hand over my mouth, holding my breath, till the shadow paused. The fog on the window stopped swirling. Silence. Then one long inhale on the other side of the glass. It sounded like it was drawing air straight out of the room. My lungs burned. I stepped back, fighting the urge to gasp. My vision blurred. The shadow pressed closer. The window creaked. The moment I couldn't hold it anymore, I exhaled sharply. The shadow straightened. Then it moved, fast, sliding across the outside wall toward the door. I grabbed my boots and bolted down the stairs barefoot, not bothering to lace them. The lock on the shed door rattled from the outside. Something tried the handle. I sprinted across the gravel lot toward the main station. My breath came in sharp bursts. Every inhale felt like an invitation. Lights spilled from the windows as I reached the porch. My hand was on the door when the breathing behind me stopped. Not faded, stopped. Cut off mid-cycle. I froze. The hair on the back of my neck rose. Slowly, too slowly, I turned my head. The edge of the forest was 30 feet away. The darkness between the trees pulsed, thickening. A shape hovered there, darker than the night around it, watching, tall, still, no face. Then something happened that nearly buckled my knees. It inhaled. Not air, light. The porch lamp flickered, dimmed, like the thing sucked the brightness toward it. Then it exhaled. The lamplight surged unnaturally bright, humming, almost shaking. It was breathing through the world around it. And I felt my own lungs answer. I stumbled into the station, slammed the door, locked it, backed away until I hit Randall's desk. He burst from his office, eyes wide. "What happened?" he demanded. I tried to speak, couldn't. My chest was still sinking with something outside. "What's out there?" he asked again, voice rising. A long breath rattled through the building, inside the walls, inside the vents, vibrating the floor. Randall stared at me, the color draining from his face. And then the lights flickered. Something moved across the windows, blotting out the moonlight. I whispered the only thing I could manage. It found me. The final breath outside the station shook the glass. Then the door handle began to turn.